Hey, and we are finally, I think, live and in person here. I'm so sorry. I'm glad you guys stuck with us through our technological issues. It started today for me. By the way, I'm John. I had to go get COVID tested, and they had to jam a thing up my nose, and it was quite unpleasant. Didn't enjoy it, and it ran into this, and then we had all sorts of other tech issues. But anyways, my name is John Marcotte. I'm the founder of Heroic Girls. We are here today to talk about one of my all-time favorite graphic novels, Saga. It's probably the best introduction to graphic novels for grown-ups that's come out in like the past 30 years. And Vivian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vivian, and I'm a Imagineer and an animator and an animation professor, and I also love Saga.
Everyone loves Saga because
Everyone
it's just
loves
a
Saga.
Oh yeah, we're only reading volume one, but both of us have book one, which is the big, thick
Yes.
hardback. I have bought this book more times than any other book I've ever owned because I kept buying the trade paperback of the first volume, and then people would borrow it and they'd want to keep it, or I'd just give it away, and then I would just buy another one because I'm very evangelical about this book. So let's start out with the kind of the obvious. Let's do the recap. Do you want to do the recap this time, or would you like me to take a crack at it?
Oh man, I'm gonna hand that off to you.
All right.
I'll defer to experience.
Because it is kind of a book that I don't think is. It isn't very plot driven in a sense. It's very character driven, but
Yes.
we'll try to recap what happens in this first arc. I actually had to go back and reread in a large part just to remember where volume one stopped because I didn't want to give away too much. But our two protagonists are Alana and Marco. We see them there on the cover. And our main character, we have been assured, is Hazel, which is the little baby that you see being breastfed there on the cover. That breastfeeding cover, by the way, one of the many things that has kept this book off the shelves of some bookstores because, we can't have nudity unless it's purient and for sexual gratification. If we show a baby being fed, which is what breasts are ultimately for, then that's bad and we can't show it. But so those are our three main protagonists. Alana is a habitant of a planet called Landfall, which is the largest planet in the galaxy, we are told, and is a technological marvel. And Marco is the native of Wreath, which is a moon of Landfall. And Wreath and Landfall have been at war, we're told, for just generations. It's been going on forever. Wreath is a magic-based society. They know magic, and Landfall is technology-based, even though Landfall has these adorable kind of pixie dragonfly wings in them. And there's a reason for that we might talk about in a little bit. So they're at war. Marco, after seeing what war is like, decides to become a pacifist and basically surrenders to the enemy. He ends up in this backwater outpost on this planet called Cleve, where they are interrogating him because they suspect he's a spy. He and his captor, his guard, who is Alana, fall in love, and she helps him escape, and they disappear and marry and start having a child there, as we see. The book actually opens with the birth of Hazel. That's the very first thing you see in fairly graphic detail for a comic book. In some of my favorite, might be my favorite opening line of a book ever, and we'll show that in just a second. But yeah, so they get married. They're on the run from both sides in the war. Both the Wreath and Landfall forces, for some reason, really don't want the public to know that people from their two species can interbreed, can fall in love. It's a little vague on exactly why they hate this idea so much, but they really, really do. Both sides are trying to get the parents dead, and they want the baby. That's where our setup is at this point. We don't fully have all the details on why that is right now. So we pick up with the baby being born. Both sides of the war show up to try to kill the parents, claim the baby, and there's a giant firefight over them. And miraculously, the only people left alive at the end of it are the parents and the baby. The two sides killed each other. The parents escape. They go through a series of misadventures. Marco is shot and is dying, and Alana makes a bargain with one of the most delightful ghosts that I've ever had the pleasure to meet, Isabelle, who is one of the natives of the planet of Cleve, who was killed in the war between the two sides. She's an innocent civilian that has died, and she basically volunteers to be their guide and nanny, and in exchange, and help save Marco's life. But in exchange, she wants to be soul bonded to the baby so that she can leave the planet. She led a very abbreviated life because of the war, and she wants to see the world and everything else. Everyone else on the planet is just terrified of, they call them the horrors, which are these ghosts that live in there. And it turns out they're just the natives of the planet that they had exterminated, and that they're perfectly nice. They just don't care for these invading armies very much, which is very understandable, I think. So Alana, Marco, Hazel, and her newfound ghost nanny, Isabelle, all managed to make for the rocket ship forest, which is just the phrase itself is just magnifique. They find a homegrown rocket ship. There's a tree that grows into a rocket ship out there, and they board it. And the book basically ends with them leaving the planet and escaping to the next chapter of their lives. And Saga is a gigantic saga. This is by no means even close to being done. Hazel is the primary character. She's an omnipotent narrator. We see her narration as an adult looking back all through the book. But right now, our protagonists are really Alana and Marco. And I did forget one part. Both of the two sides, the Landfall has conscripted Prince Robot the Fourth, which is a walking European nobility with a television for a head. That is his job is to chase down and kill the parents and grab the child. And then on the other side, the Wreath forces have conscripted a number of freelancers, most notably the Stalk and the Will. And their job is to track down, kill the parents, and take the baby. So we do have these named people that are very specifically after them. It's not just this, faceless mass of people. There are some specific people that are after them to kill and take the baby. And the Will has a companion named Lioncat, who may be the best character ever to have been created. I'm not sure. I got to think about it, but Lioncat is way up there. She is fantastic. It's a large, maybe like cheetah-sized hairless cat that can only say the word lying, and it tells if people are lying or not, and is a fantastic character.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember if I've summarized correctly. Is there any major thing that I've left out that we should mention in the summary before we start talking about gory details?
Well, were we supposed to go to the end of 5 or to 7?
End of 5.
End of 5. Okay. Then
yeah.
I guess the only thing I would add is that we end on a cliffhanger of Marco's parents showing up.
Yeah, Marco's at the end. Is it Marco's parents? No, it's Alana's parents. No, it's Marco's. You're right. It's Marco's parents. Yeah. And Alana almost kills her in-laws, which we've all wanted to do at one point or another, I suppose. So it's so we have yet another wrinkle put in, and the Will actually picks up a Sophie. And did we get Sophie named in this one? I can't remember, but
I don't think I don't think she's named yet.
Yeah.
But the only other thing I would add is that, as you mentioned, there's two sides coming after, our two protagonists, and within all of the conflict of them trying to control each other and kill and capture each other, they end up opposing each other. The Will is trying to now, I think, wants to kill Prince. I call him Ive. I call him Prince Ive, but Prince Robot.
He's I guess the fourth in the line of robots. I'm not sure. It's hard to keep on topic because I immediately want to start talking about the just fantastic, creature creation that runs all the way through this book. But I'm gonna focus. The Stalk and the Will are both purportedly on the same side. They're both freelancers who have independently been hired. Whoever manages to kill the parents and get the child first, gets the bounty. But they're also former past lovers that have a complicated history, and they are arguing back and forth, and the Stalk gets killed by the opposite side, the Landfall side, in the forces led by Prince Robot. So the Will has, for the second time in the book, just completely gone off assignment, and now he wants to kill Prince Robot, the fourth. And he, so yeah, I think we're just going to have to start getting into it. I'm going to talk about this side plot that with the Will, because it is so fantastic and so becomes integral to the story as you go forward. It's not something that gets dropped. The Will was hired to kill the parents and grab the kid. He finds out that the Stalk has a 3 or 4 day lead on him, and he decides, forget it. She's already, has that much of a lead, the parents are already dead. He better not bother. He's been giving basically a what they call a white card, which is like an unlimited expense account. So he goes to a intergalactic bordello and immediately is just going to have a good time. He's going to spend the money until they cut him off, because why bother even trying for the parents? He figures the Stalk has that completely covered. And because he has this expensive card, the people at the bordello say, oh, you want something special? And they take him and they introduce him to a little orphaned girl by the name, she doesn't have a name. She's just called Slave Girl. So yeah, they're basically trying to get him to, offering him a 6-year-old for sexual gratification at this place. So up until now, I think we didn't know exactly what to think of the Will. You're not sure how to feel about him, but he gets offered the 6-year-old, and she says she'll do anything he wants. So he says, okay, well, close your eyes. That's the first thing he asks. She closes her eyes, and he kills her pimp, her handler there, and begins to try to escape with her from the bordello. I don't think we get a full resolution to that story. So that's the first inkling that we really get, that the Will has a conscience that is completely independent of monetary gain, that he has his own set of morals and values that might involve killing people, but he's not going to do something as creepy as they were offering him there. So that is one of the reasons that a lot of people really kind of like the Will. So let's just talk about Saga and its place in the world specifically. So it's one of the books that there are some books that you get because people say, oh, the story is so good. And there are other books that sometimes people say, oh, the art is fantastic. You want to get it, and the story's okay, but man, you want to see this art. Saga is the book that is just hitting on both channels so strongly. There is not one that I think takes precedence over the other. The art in this is fantastic. It's some of the best I've ever seen. And the story itself is also fantastic. So let's start with art, which is, I'm going to turn it over to your domain. I have taken copious notes, but I'm sure you'll have more insight than I will. So what do we want to say about Fiona Staple, who is our artist here, her art on the book Saga?
Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I think, I feel weird talking about her because I know that you know her personally, I think, or you've met her before.
I interviewed her once, and a really, really good friend got me an autographed poster of hers from Comic-Con one year. So that was, that would be the one. That was way at the beginning of this.
Yeah, that's true. I think when I got that poster signed for you, I don't even know if I had read it yet. I just knew I was on an assignment. I had to get this poster signed. All you have to do is flip to any page at any point in any part of the book, and it's very, very clear that how not just technically proficient she is as an artist, but also imaginative. And she's kind of from that, what is it? The rural Canada. I think the last person we talked about who's from there was Emily Carroll, who did Through the Woods, which I was absolutely enamored with. And I think that there's something about coming from a place that, she's from the wild, just like she's like being from the outback. She's from the outback of Canada, and just kind of like she's just so aware of where she pulls her references from, and also something else she has in common with Emily Carroll is an early interest in horror, and from a young age. And so I think when you see the character of the Stalk, it becomes very clear that she's got kind of an alien-esque understanding of how something can look kind of tantalizing and also deeply disturbing and gross at the same time.
See if I can find the stock. And I'm flipping through, and I'm apologizing if anybody is upset purely by nudity or swear words, because they are all through this thing. Here's the Will and Lioncat. So I wanted to show a picture of the stock, and it might take me a minute to find it. Oh, there's the stock's hand.
That might be good enough, because I mean, I think even just that as a teaser, something that I heard her and Brian K. Vaughan say in an interview is, with the first cover, they almost wanted to repel a certain type of comic book fan. They were using the artwork to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, if you can't handle this, this isn't for you. And I think a lot of times, because it comic books is such a male dominant industry, the way people try to draw that line in the sand is usually just kind of grotesque, I think. It's like, oh, this is hardcore. And there's only like two ways that they can think of that. And that's through violence and sexual violence. And that's that's how it's going to make this so cool and hardcore. When really, as you were saying, the image of the breastfeeding mother was the thing that actually scared a lot of people off for reading the story. And anyway, I think that having a female artist tackle this perspective within the story is really, really unique. She's exactly Christopher. It's interesting the way Saga has antagonists that you root for and you view them as heroes.
I hit it before you had a chance to read the whole thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, like the Will. He's a bounty hunter. He's he's gonna kill our heroes for money, but I think when you see his love for the Stalk, he's heartbroken. He wants to care for children. Like, he's got a strong moral compass. How can you hate him? And I think that's, one of the most beautiful things about the story.
They managed to complicate almost every character in the story. That there are very few people that have these like kind of black and white. You're not going to run into the Joker here, just someone who's a pure agent of chaos or evil that does anything. The people that are the antagonists in the story, we usually get some glimpse into their inner life. Prince Robot has an unhappy marriage and is suffering from PTSD from a battle that he was in where he saw all his friends killed before them. At the same time, he's trying to kill the main characters, but you could easily switch points of view and see the entire story from his point of view, and he's not essentially a bad person at his core. The Will is not a bad person at his core. The Stalk probably had even more layers of complexity that we didn't get to, because she isn't with us for a long time. That's a minor spoiler, but it is in the context of the book that we're talking about today.
Right.
We get those layers of complexion on almost every single character that we touch, including our protagonist and most definitely the antagonist. So some things that I noticed about the art are that I thought about. I wanted to talk about process, because this was the brilliant thing that I thought about to talk about with Fiona Staples when I spoke with her, and she is doing something that a lot of people are doing now, but she is a pioneer and she's inventing stuff that people haven't done before. She does the book entirely digital, and she does every step of the art process herself. Usually the art process is broken up with at least 3 or 4 people on a monthly comic book. You will have a penciler who then passes it to the inker, who takes the pencils and draws over them with a hard line, who then passes it to a colorist who draws color on top of it and colors the book. And then we usually have a letterer, who is someone who's just specializing in having really good penmanship, and they do all the word balloons. I think a lot of people think those are just typed, and I've seen books where they use a comic font to type it, and it doesn't look right. Lettering is itself a skill and a job, and I'm not going to pretend that I always give people like letterists and colorists their due, but they're exceptionally important to books. But in this case, we don't have to worry about it separating those out, because all of it is being done by Fiona Staple. So she does it digitally, and one of the reasons she says she likes that is because she doesn't have to go through a penciling stage. She likes doing her lines really loose, and she can draw basically with the pen digitally, and if she doesn't like something, she can just zap it away, but she doesn't find herself retracing the same drawing, which she, and I'm going to quote here, says is boring. So she doesn't like doing that. And she thinks that gives her a certain look and a style that it wouldn't have a little roughness in the inks that would not be possible if she was doing it in a traditional format. I think her use of color in this book is just superb. And we're talking about art. I should put her back up here. Hold on a second. And there we go. And she talks of her use of color it's some of the best I've ever seen. And I found a quote from her that I thought was really interesting, was that she said that when she's doing outdoor scenes, she actually starts with a color palette. That's the first thing she chooses, is what colors are going to be present in the scene, and then she slowly adds other elements into the scene. We start with the color palette, and then we slowly add other things to the scene. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting and unique take.
I've seen her. Keep going.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry. So one of the things that she's inspired by is animation, and I actually didn't pick up on this when I went through it the first time, and then once she explained it, I was like, duh. But she thinks of her characters as they're on cell layers.
Right.
So the things that are in the foreground, the characters which are moving in the scene, are basically two colors. They're kind of on a flat color palette with like a shadow layer, possibly a highlight layer. And then her backgrounds are painted. And I think that really adds kind of a depth of field to the frames. Sorry, I interrupted you because I wanted to talk about this on this frame. You can see how much action the vines have in them, and then the light coming through in the background. It feels very painterly. It's an amazing rule to have, and a great design language to sort of set the entire comic to.
And to tack on to what you were saying, Staples has said that she absolutely does not want to paint the characters because she thinks it ends up making them look very static, that there's something that makes them more dynamic when they are colored with more flat colors rather than something like what Alex Ross does, who is a famous comic book painter who does just some of the most gorgeous comic art you can ever look at. But I will agree with her that his images almost always look very static. They look like they're posed, pinup style photos of these characters rather than them living and breathing and engaged in action. And I think Staples has a point there, although I'm not going to say too much ill about Alex Ross. I absolutely love his work. And she said anime and video games were her two thing. I really wanted to figure out how video games fit into this. I haven't quite put my finger on it, but I do see the anime type of influence. And one thing I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting, and I read it when I was doing research for this, I'd never heard it before, that she hates drawing technology. She does not like it. So at every turn in this book, when there is an opportunity for technology to be introduced, she finds a way around it. They needed a spaceship, so they ended up with an organic grown spaceship that was actually a living tree, because she doesn't want to draw those straight lines and buttons and everything like that. She doesn't think that she thinks that art's kind of sterile. So it gives the book a really, really unique feel. It is technically a science fiction story, but there is so many fantasy elements in it. There is magic that exists in this world, and even the technology itself drifts in a fantasy direction. Vaughn said that Star Wars was a big influence on this, and you really feel that Star Wars itself is kind of purportedly a science fiction story, but it is very much a fantasy story at its heart. Absolutely. It's just dressed up with some science fiction terminology around it, and I think Saga, you can very much say the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you get later on, I think she becomes more comfortable with the blending of the tech and the organic. But what I think we read the same article, but that she just felt unprepared, going in with all the, there's robots and there's spaceships and they're going to go to a central station with a holding cell. And I love her incorporation of organic shapes, though. Her skirting of the technological language that we would understand as like the inner workings of a car or something. And she finds a way to turn it into like this beautiful organic shape. And she also pulls a lot of reference from, our own cultures here on Earth. Right. So, you can see her coding different characters in different kinds of ways. Here's Prince Robot, and they're coded very like French, European, and Marco and the people from Wreath are coded, Asian, Southeast Asian, they have more like the kimono cuts with their, their robes that they wear.
Right.
And yeah, she and it's all built in, and it's makes everything look so gorgeous and distinct.
The she, and just go furthering on that thing, the planet of Cleve, where they start out, we don't get a ton of the architecture of it because they end up on the run, like kind of in the wilderness pretty quickly. But all of the architecture in there is sourced from Cambodia. It has a specific feel, time, and place. She's very good at finding real world references to things. And I think it's also worth talking about what an incredible partnership she and Vaughn have created. Normally there is one person's creative vision that's really driving a book, and you could give that to Vaughn he had the idea for the story. But while they're writing this story, they have passed things back and forth so much. So she doesn't like writing or drawing technology that much and wants to do things like, let's make the spaceship into a tree. And she passed that feedback and those ideas back to Vaughn, and that's where the story ended up going. So probably not since somebody like, Lee and Kirby back in the early days, if you had this, back and forth where the artist is contributing so much to story as you have here. Also, she just likes creating weird little characters and character design, and she does that, and she sends them to Vaughn and say, is this anything? Could we use this for something? So most of the characters that you see, he may have said we need a character to do this to further the plot, but the design of them came straight from Fiona Staples, and Brian K. Vaughan altered the plot, molded things around those characters so that they would fit the story better, or that the story would suit the characters that she's written. So the story was subtly changed to match the designs that Staples was sending back, and vice versa. There was a real synergy, a little symbiosis between these two that is exceptionally rare in comic books. You usually would have to find a single creator, one of those people, rare birds that writes, draws, does everything on their own to find it work so well together. And I think in some ways, this is even better because you're getting two people's idea playing off each other. And I think that sometimes some real magic happens when somebody else suggests an idea that you may not have. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other book that we read where I thought that I was getting the vibe of that dynamic was Snot Girl.
Oh yeah.
With Leslie Hung and Brian Lee O'Malley, where I think he was writing it, but I think he was really inspired by her character designs. And
that was a super interesting book for me because I've read a lot of Brian Lee O'Malley, but he has always illustrated his own work. He did most famously Scott Pilgrim versus the World. He did Lost at Sea. He's done a series of books that I've read that I've really enjoyed. And he has this very classic cartoony, anime-inspired look and feel. And then we pair him with an artist who is just ultra feminine in drawing style and way more detailed than he has ever been. Still, I would say very Asian influenced. It still has a very big anime feel, but it's farther from the cartoony side of anime. It's more in the realistic side of anime. And it's interesting how the artist presented changes your perception of the words on the page and stuff. And that's a really cool observation. Another book everybody should read if they haven't read it is Snot Girl. It's fantastic, and don't be afraid of the title. It's a great book. I wonder how many people he lost just because it was called Snot Girl that would have otherwise probably loved that thing. But I'm hoping word of mouth picked them right back up again.
Yeah.
So
sorry, back to Saga. My bad.
Yeah. No, go ahead. So I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I do think her use of hand lettering for Hazel's omnipotent narrator is really, really cool in there. It's not something you see very often in comics. Normally, if you're going to have an omnipotent narrator, their text ends up boxed at the bottom of the panel. You see like a little box at the bottom of the panel that tells you what that person is thinking or saying. But here we just have these free-form letters going all through there. And I realize I'm bringing that up. They're not on the page, and now I have to go dig for one. But you get these free-form letters of her. Oh, there's the stalk. There we go. That's what I was talking about. I have seen this cosplayed in the most daring possible way, might I add, and it is fantastic. I would think this is a character you couldn't possibly pull off in any capacity, and I've seen it done rather well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they went the full Monty there just for the photo shoot, but because you have some Daryl Hannah and Splash strategically placed hair that can't move in order for this to still work at a
Yes.
cosplay contest. But they did face paint to do the multiple eyes, and they had, I'm assuming, very close friends underneath the giant skirt being armed because the stock. Yeah, there we go. We
Oh,
have
wow.
all these arms and things popping out. So they had different women's hands sticking out from underneath the edge of the shirt, holding different weapons and things. It's one of the most amazing cosplays I've ever seen. So let's see here. And I'm trying to find, there's Isabelle. I love her.
Isabelle.
That
so
is
just
this one of my favorite all-time covers of anything, anytime. Shows so much character and personality in a little bit. She died by stepping on a landmine, so she's only half of the woman she used to be, but she is adorable.
she
There
is.
is,
And one of the things I really love about her too is she doesn't know whose landmine it was. And I think
no,
I don't know if we mentioned this, but the something I think that's very pertinent to the story is that even though the war is between these two places, they have taken their war intergalactic. And so that's why there's this separate planet, Cleve, which is completely involved. Other planets have been entirely devastated by this war, which is these two sides kind of scrabbling through the universe and just destroying everything in its path. And so what killed Isabelle, what killed all the children in this scene is a war that they weren't involved in at all. They're just indigenous people who were in the way. And
actually,
it's
at
a
one point,
great story point.
Alana, Isabelle mentions that her parents, that she was taking her through the tunnels that her parents had created to help the resistance. And Alana goes, "Oh, your parents were terrorists." And he goes, "Well, one man's terrorist, another woman freedom fighter, because from their point of view, they just wanted these people that were massacring them off of their planet.
Yeah.
It is explicitly mentioned that the because Wreath is a moon of landfall. If either one of them is destroyed, they will spin out of orbit and everyone will die on their planets. So yes, they have made the battlefield everywhere in the galaxy except for home. And when we see the home planet and the home moon of these people, they're not really having the suffering of war like everywhere else in the galaxy is, because these two are fighting. The home people are just, for them, it's like a television show that they're watching. They don't have the impact of the horribleness of war that everyone else is having to suffer through because these two are at war. So I think that's a kind of a meta commentary on the state of especially wars the U.S. has participated in more recently. That you have this disengaged populace that doesn't really understand the horror that's getting perpetrated in their name in other places. So, and controlling the propaganda is a huge motivator for both sides, as we see. When they want to take care of the parents and stuff, it's a pure propaganda mission from what we know at this point. They don't want people to know, I think, that everybody can just get along and even procreate together. They want you to dehumanize, or human's not really the right word for everybody in this book, but you know what I mean. The other side and make them think that they're animals and everything else. So
othering. They want everybody to be to other everybody. And I think there's a really great in-book metaphor, which I'm about to swallow my tongue right now because I think I'm skipping ahead. Have we discussed at all the Oswald heist? The author, has that come up?
We see the book once or twice here, but we do not get too far into it. He becomes a much more important part of the story in a little bit. But yeah, Oswald Feist, or is it Heist?
Heist, I think.
Heist. It's the person who writes these romance novels that Alana was hooked on. She read them all the time. There is a copy of it. That's one of the times it's mentioned. This author that writes these romance novels becomes a character in the book, later in the series. But you would think it's very trivial and very unimportant, but Prince Robot has discovered that she read these books and thinks that this is the key to understanding how she could betray her people and go off with a member of the opposition and everything. And it's portrayed very much as a cheesy romance novel, just the kind of thing that Fabio would appear on the cover of. But then there are characters in there that take the meaning of these books a step further, talking about, we're not going to say love because I actually use a different metaphor, is the opposite of war, and about how these books that show people connecting are essentially important in a way that maybe people who dismiss them don't understand. I thought that was actually kind of a very interesting metaphor that helped further the story and helped further some themes in there. Maybe I've been bad at downplaying the importance of romance novels.
Well, I think that's the whole thing, right? Is that Alana's mind was opened by fiction, right? And it made her kind of receptive to something different outside of what she had been, outside of what like programming and propaganda had taught her.
Right.
And I think that's the danger that she got from that book, which opened her mind, is the real life danger that the two of them pose as a couple. On top of,
romance novels are very much full of the star-crossed lovers trope that's very common in there. And in this case, star-crossed is actually a literally accurate description of them. But I think that, that whole idea of people that don't like each other at first, or that have reasons not to like each other, eventually find that they have more in common, is a pretty common trope in romantic fiction of all stripes. And
absolutely,
I think someone that is kind of obsessed with those kind of things might pick up on that and might be a romantic in the sense that they could see the value in someone else that they're supposed to hate because they've been primed by reading that kind of fiction. I can kind of see the bones of what they're talking about there. I think romance, like a lot of other genres, gets a bad rap. I think that, when romance is good enough, it just gets slid out of the romance category and ends up over in literature or something else. I always bring that up for science fiction, which also gets a bad rap, maybe not quite as bad as romance, frankly, but Kurt Vonnegut is a fantastic writer. He's a science fiction writer. I mean, Slaughterhouse-Five has time travel, aliens, all this other stuff. You're not going to find it in the sci-fi section of most bookstores. You're going to find it in literature or classics or something else. When genre fiction gets too good, they, instead of saying, oh, that genre has value, they move it out of the genre and say, well, this really isn't science fiction, or this really isn't romance. And I think that's kind of on us, that we like looking down on the genre fiction. So we anything time it proves that we're wrong to do that, we just recategorize that work to make sure that we can keep looking down on genre fiction. So
well, I mean, on that topic, and I'll try to put this delicately, I think another thing that romance kind of Venn diagram crosses over with is, sexuality, and something that could be called as smut, right? And I think that, again, going back to Fiona Staple being such a deft hand, she has such a great way of portraying sexuality in the book. It does have sex scenes in it,
many.
But there are many. But she has a great way of portraying sexuality in its functionality. Obviously, as you already mentioned, the whole book opens with a graphic birth, and the love between the two protagonists, the struggling marriage between the prince robot and the princess, and then of course the whole sex planet, which was called
Sextillion.
I wrote it down, Sextillion, which is truly grotesque. And I think in someone else's hands, it could have turned into something that was either intentionally or unintentionally titillating. But it looks mostly kind of gross, kind of funny, a little humiliating, and then it all kind of
Caligula-esque in the background. I mean, you take it as background noise so much, but if you focus on it for too long, you go, there is some horrific stuff going on back here. That in a sexual, fashion, horrific stuff.
Right. I mean, even the hosts of Sextillion are just like heads with legs coming out of the bottom, and so you're kind of like, what's going on? Ugh. It's just so
it's individual items of female sexuality exaggerated, not necessarily the ones you might have thought of in the first place, but that is definitely what is happening there. And it's interesting how much of a grown-up the book asks you to be. They throw all this nudity and sexual imagery all over the place, and not once did I look at that and think, it's just a natural part of life and stuff. And usually it's either in some cases, rare cases, it's in a loving fashion. It's in a matter of fact fashion with somebody like the Stalk, who's just topless the entire time, no commentary made on it. Or it's in a horrific fashion. Sextillion is horrifying. It really is. And if there's some guy out there that is reading that and going, oh wow, then he needs to seek help. It's really truly a warning sign. It is a book that has the most sex and nudity in it that is the least prurient of anything I've ever read. If you are going to automatically be turned off by sex and violence, Saga is not the book for you. There is at times graphic sex, graphic violence that is really kind of horrifying in both cases, but it is not the kind of thing where it is done in an exploitative manner. It is always story centric, and I think there is a commentary being made of how central sex is to human existence and how unfortunately central violence has become to human existence, or the existence in this world. But I think there's a lot of commentary about ourselves as well in there. So that's my take on it. I do know that a lot of people are turned off, like you said, by the cover. There's a woman breastfeeding on there, which is the most benign and natural, nudity that exists in the book. So I think they're right. If that's going to turn you off, just don't even bother opening the cover here, because they're going to lose you immediately.
Actually, I think you saying the word benign, I think that's somewhere that Saga, just as a story, thrives. It thrives in the mundane.
Yes.
And how small, like within this huge war and the planetary conflict, there's two people and they're trying to survive.
Yep.
And, here's this ghost, and they call them, before you meet Isabelle, they call them the horrors, they call them the gawkers, they call them they're kind of this epic scale. She calls themselves they're the spiritual defenders of Cleve, right? They're supposed to be wreaking havoc and taking revenge on the people who destroyed them. In fact, she's 14 years old?
Between 14 and 16, I don't remember.
She's actually quite young, and she's just a teenager, and her friends are just teenagers too. And it's so, again, it kind of takes something that could be this, it's an epic ghost who's been alive for 1,000 years. No, she's 14 when she's a little kid.
And shows the humanity even of the dead, and then makes you reflect on, it's like when you watch, we always comment on I always comment on an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. You'll watch Commando or something like that, and if you do a body count, he is just mowing people down left and right. And for most people, and myself included, it has virtually no impact on you. You're get him, Arnie, get him. And then you watch something like Pulp Fiction. And Pulp Fiction people will say, oh my gosh, how graphic and awful it was, mainly because one guy dies, Marvin gets shot in the face. And and we see that one guy, but we see the reality of what that death is like. I always say, Tarantino, at least death is messy in his world. It's not, you're not having this fantasy where you can kill all these people and there's not really a consequence of any sort. Just that it's just like you're playing a video game. When people die in Tarantino's world or in something like a Saga, there is real consequence. There's grieving, there's blood, there's viscera. It's awful. And we get to feel the impact of those deaths in a way that a lot of books would just ignore. So we had set this war up, and that Cleve was this background battlefield. And until Isabelle makes us confront it, we had not thought once about the indigenous people that lived on this planet that had, by Isabelle's admission, been completely wiped out. They've committed genocide on this planet. There are no indigenous people left because the war completely consumed them, a war that they had absolutely no stake in, conducted by people that they did not want on their planet. That's what happened to them. And they never let people just be used as props. They always have more layers of complexity. The world is more complicated than you would have in a regular science fiction or action epic. They are constantly making you reevaluate what you think of different people and how you consider them. I absolutely am in love with this book. So we started talking about art, and then we just wandered into talking about just anything that we could think of. I think we should probably touch base. There's one thing I wanted to point out about the partnership between Staples and Brian K. Vaughan, and that is how incredibly unequal it was when this book was launched. Brian K. Vaughan has been a television writer. He wrote for Lost. He was the showrunner for Under the Dome, which ran a couple seasons on CBS. I know he's written for other TV shows as well, and I don't remember. He had created The Runaways for Marvel. He did Why the Last Man for DC. Both of those have been turned into TV shows. He is one of the most in-demand comic book writers on the planet. Fiona Staples had done like 3 issues of 4 different projects here and there. People thought her art was pretty, but had not really established herself as some go-to artist. She was fairly anonymous. I mean, she was the kind of person when Vaughn met her that would set up a booth at a con and she would be lonely and nobody would be stopping by to look at her stuff. He recognized her value, made her a full 50-50 partner, not only in name, but in deed, listened to her. And they ended up in this great relationship and elevated her till she's one of the most sought after artists in the industry. And she's won a series of, I know the book itself has won like 17 Harvey Awards and 12 Eisners. So I wrote that down. That's so far. They've taken a couple of years off. That's why we're talking about the book now. This month, Saga is coming back with issue 55 after taking 2.5 years off, and people have been demanding. I mean, the fervor for this book has not dropped off one iota. Everybody's sitting around waiting for Saga to come back. They took some time off to kind of recharge their batteries, and they're back, and everybody's really excited. But I thought it's amazing. I mean, Fiona Staples had no leverage in that arrangement. Brian K. Vaughan could have treated her as work for hire, kept the whole book, everything for himself, really, even using her ideas and everything. He didn't have to give her, half ownership, half the creative control, but he did. And I really kind of salute him for that. I think that was a great thing we don't always see in comics. There were some issues when The Walking Dead became a huge mega hit and became a television show. The original artist of the book kind of got cut out of the deal by Robert Kirkman, who owns it all. And, hell, I love Robert Kirkman. I love The Walking Dead. I love Invincible. I love Outcast, a lot of things he's done. But the comics industry is very dog-eat-dog, particularly if you're working for the big 2 publishers, but even when you're working on indie projects like this. And I love that Brian K. Vaughan, how fully realized he made the partnership with Fiona Staples at a time when Fiona did not have the leverage to really insist that was the case. He made sure that she was taken care of at every level. And we've got this fantastic product as a result, I think.
The quality shows, it speaks for itself. So
yeah. What else I can say? Here's an idea that I've read several times, and I want to see what your take on it is. They created this book to specifically be unadaptable. It is not supposed to be able to be adapted into a television program. It is not supposed to be able to be adapted into a film. His Vaughn's quote on this was, "We wanted to make it too filthy for anyone to make it into a movie and too expensive for anyone to make it into a television show. And it is supposed to be uniquely suited for the medium of comics." And how successful do you think they were in that endeavor? Is this just a story that you can't imagine being told in another format, or is there another way that you could tell this story? Because I'm sure that since it became such a big hit, there are movie executives, there are television executives that are sitting there looking at this, chewing at the edges, trying to figure out how they could adapt it into another medium. Do you think that could be done? Is that possible?
I actually do. I think I'm an optimist. I think anything is possible. Yes. I think the thing that would prevent it is I don't think I couldn't see executives getting behind this, because it would be difficult to find its audience once you put that much money into it. Here's the thing, though. I think people assume that success equals a live action adaptation, and I do not believe that. I think this could be an amazing, limited series, adapted animation,
Oh, just let me think about it for a minute. I just want to say, you and I met through a shared love of animation, and that would be spectacular. I would love to see these characters. animated.
It would exactly, and it would be the ideal way because it automatically would exist within its audience, right? It would be
right.
People who are ready for the unexpected and the weird, and the teenage girl whose viscera hangs from her inside all the time, and the cat and the sextillion and all that stuff. I mean, if Kon Satoshi was still alive, I would say, like, please, sir,
Yeah.
partner with these two people.
And we would be, and you and I would be teaming together to keep Ralph Bakshi away from it. You just make sure that he got nowhere near it.
Oh my God.
It would, because I know he would want to do it, and I really would not want him to do it. That would be, those are the two things that I would be positive of.
He'd be that person who would read it and take the wrong things from it. That person you were describing earlier.
Yeah. A couple other interesting things about it. That Vaughn had mentioned that one of their big goals was to make sure that Alana and Marco were ethnically ambiguous. That I think there was a real concerted effort to make sure that they could represent as large of a slice of humanity as possible. And the parts that you couldn't capture with ethnic ambiguity, we have later characters that are introduced that are clearly, coded African. Clearly, that we do have some other races that just being kind of brown doesn't quite cover in there as well. But I thought that was interesting, and both from us white people being asked to sit in the shoes of somebody who doesn't look exactly like us, which I'm always a big proponent of. I've seen enough stories about me, and also from people who don't get as much representation. And I thought that was kind of a cool thing that they built that in as a core concept. And even to take it one step further, Hazel herself is constantly referred to by the bad guys as like a half-breed, and I can't pronounce this word. I'm so happy that I can't, because I never have heard it pronounced miscagyny or whatever, the old idea of
miscegenation.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever that is, I don't even care. I'm not going to learn it because I don't want to know. But it's the old idea that it was a crime for people of different races to marry, which I wish that I could look and say that is just some distant past thing, but that was really only settled in the 1960s, which
legally,
which is kind of sad that legally that there were still states in the Union where two people that loved each other couldn't marry if they were different races, and people would get arrested for that. The Loves were the case that finally broke that open and made it legal across the entire country. But the fact that we were still fighting that fight, and I'm old, I know, and everything, but shortly before I was born, every now and then, there are things I take for granted that I realize, are not, I can't take for granted, and we're not really very long in the past. We're still very much up in the air, and that's one of them. So,
truly, I think within the world of the story too, I think it's great having them, as you were saying, the star-crossed lovers, but that Hazel herself was also born on another planet. So both parents and the child were each born on a separate planet.
And that's actually one of the reasons that Hazel has to be bonded, or Isabelle has to be bonded to Hazel's soul specifically. Isabelle, as a ghost, can bond herself to the soul of a native of Cleve, and neither of the parents were actually born on Cleve, but Hazel was. And that's another way of kind of freeing her from the conflict between these two places, is that she has nothing to do with either of them, really, when it comes down to it. And I love the idea that this family just wants to be left alone in peace, and this war cannot allow that to happen. That it is chasing them literally across the galaxy to prevent them from just hiding somewhere and living out their days in peace. That's all they want to do. They don't have some big, we're going to overturn the empire agenda. All they want is to be left alone, and they can't. And in real world terms, I think that's true sometimes for people of these type of issues too, not necessarily war, but racism and all these other things. Sometimes people just want to be left alone, and society won't let them. So what else do we have to say about the story? I think, we mentioned it was based on Star Wars, and the other thing that Vaughn has cited as an influence were the difficulties of becoming a new parent. And when you talked about being grounded in the mundane, that's where that comes from. And it is interesting how fantastical everything is around this couple, and how often we return to the idea of he's changing a diaper and complaining just how much it stinks, or they're giving birth and they're talking about whether it should be a natural childbirth or whether he could use a pain blocking spell because that's what he has as in magic and stuff like that. The kind of conversations that parents and expecting parents and new parents have all the time are peppered all the way throughout this book, because they never let us forget that we're talking about a family, and that this family has real life issues to work on and that they have to deal with. And I think that's really a cool part of the book. And one of the reasons it's so successful is not because of the fantastic. It is because of the mundane. It's because of how real this family feels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole way they get into the situation that we see here is because they're so exhausted, they just fall asleep, sitting upright, holding their little baby. And it's a really cute moment until you realize they're surrounded by danger again. So
it's right about, well, I mean, at first you think it's going to be the horrors, but that's where we meet the stock. They have fallen asleep, and then they wake up because Hazel's crying and senses something. And we have been primed to think it's going to be the horrors, and it's not. It's the stock, Will's girlfriend. I don't even want to think about logistics there. We're just going to keep away from it. But anyways, the stock there. And so we have this whole scene with them. And the stock is a bounty hunter that's trying to kill both of the parents. And it would be so easy just to see her as a two-dimensional villain. It would be so easy to do that. And she is actually partially redeemed, I think, by the Will's feelings towards her. And we have already grown to like the Will. And then finally the horrors do come out. And as you mentioned, it's a bunch of little kids. You can see they're mainly battle damaged. We have a little boy that has bullet holes in his chest, a girl missing an eye. Our hero, Isabelle there, is missing her entire bottom lower torso. I love her t-shirt. I would see that is a cool t-shirt, a hipster teenager t-shirt. Their alien features, I guess, are these oversized ears, which are kind of pierced in a cool kid fashion. This looks like a bunch of kids that are ready to hang out at the mall, except for the being dead aliens thing. But and again, bringing home the mundane, the casualties of a war that aren't the heroes or the villains or anything else, but are just people that die for no really good reason. And I just think that was kind of cool. I'm trying to think of other bits or things I do. One of the I think the mysteries that the book sets up that we try to explain later is, why do both sides care so much about this? Both Wreath and Landfall are obsessed with this couple. They're sending secret operatives. They want to keep it quiet, everything else. The fact that these two people fell in love and have a child is an intergalactic incident. And I think exploring why it is such an intergalactic incident is something that we haven't 100% settled yet, even, as far in the book as we've gotten. We got up to issue 54, and is going to take the entire, length and breadth of the book to really fully explore why, they consider her such an abomination, but also something they desire to capture and possess, why they want the parents dead. All those things come, mixing in.
I think the one thing we do in text within the first 5 chapters is when the Will, I almost called him Will, when the Will, the bounty hunter, takes his job from Wreath, she, the woman he takes the bounty from, mentions that there is a prophecy that I don't know if it's the baby or Marco is going to be responsible for millions of deaths. And it's kind of not clear. I think Lioncat is there, and I don't think he calls her out on that one. So maybe the prophecy does exist. Maybe,
or it could just be what she's been told. Lioncat can detect if someone's lying, but he can't detect if someone's been lied to, I don't think, or she. I said him. Lioncat is a girl, and I sorry for not using the correct pronouns. Lioncat, it's interesting. We have not really talked about Lioncat very much. We've mentioned in passing. Lioncat is many people's favorite character in the entire series. A cat that can only say the word lying. Lioncat has an amazing scene with the little slave girl who later on gets the name of Sophie later in the series. That is absolutely heartrending and touching, and I wish we had gotten that far so I could put it up on the screen and talk about it. you would think a cat that can only say one word and really only calls people out when they're lying, there would be no way for it to communicate any complex emotions or have an interesting scene. And yet they did something that was just phenomenal. And yeah, so Lioncat's awesome. Everybody should own a Lioncat plushie or something like that. You can find them at your finer comic stores. If you read the book and you're the right audience for this, you're going to love that cat. So here I got yep. And Sheila Brown knows the scene that I'm talking about. I think, Vivian, you know the scene that I'm talking about as well.
Yeah.
By the way, I saw your head nodding. I'm so, whatchamacallit, I'm so in love with that cat. And I wish I could share that, but it's out of the scope of what we're talking about. Sheila actually had made a couple of comments, and I've not been keeping up on them. Her take is that it can be adapted, that in 2013, when it came out, no, you couldn't have adapted it, but in 2022, maybe yes. And I had considered that a little bit. I thought, well, after Game of Thrones and some of these other shows, Game of Thrones had the kind of nudity that this book does not, where it's just like, let's make them naked and see if 13-year-old boys will tune in when they're not supposed to. That's what it felt like to me. I almost didn't make it very far into Game of Thrones because of that, because I thought the nudity and the sex was so gratuitous that it was not necessarily really furthering the plot very much. There was just a lot of naked women for no reason, but the show was very good, and it went away from that. Partially at the insistence of the principal actors who did not want to do that anymore, and I don't blame them. So what do you think? Do you think there's any validity to what Sheila's saying here, that maybe when this book was created, that would not have been possible, but after we've seen things like The Walking Dead or Invincible with its graphic violence on Amazon, that maybe there is a place where something like this could be adapted out there in the world in the year 2022?
Certainly. I mean, I don't think in 2013 there was anything like technological issue with adapting something like this at all. It truly is the receptiveness of the audience and the willingness to invest what is necessary to bring something like that to the screen in a way that is respectful of the original material, right? Because you'd be like, oh, it's a green screen. Like, we don't want to see the Aqua Teen Hunger Force version Saga, right? We want to see,
probably not.
Right? Like, we want to see, like I was saying, like the Kon Satoshi version, or like almost like a Peter Jackson version if it was going to be live action, right? Like, you want to see things that are practical. And, even with The Mandalorian, like what they've done with puppets, what they've done with projection,
right?
The time is right if they were going to try to do something like that. But again, there is something really special about having it in a book. And I will never not advocate for something to be animated instead of live action. So
yeah, I think that's fair. And I do think that this is the entire thing is so fantastical that trying to do it in practical effects or practical things would be very difficult in a lot of cases. It would end up being, if it was practical all the way through, it would end up being actors standing in front of a green screen almost the entire time. Everything from settings to characters are so out there that I don't think you could do them with practical effects, which I think in live action, the best uses of CGI and thing have been when they've used practical effects when they could. That's why the first Jurassic Park still looks better than almost any of the sequels, is because they use practical effects for a lot of it. They use, things that people think are CGI are not CGI. They're actually practical. They had a big live action T-Rex that they could use to move around and scare people with. And actually the raptors in some of the scenes were actually puppeted. You can see that famously when the raptors open the door of the kitchen to chase after the kids. If you're looking right when they come through the door, there's a guy puppeting one of them behind there, and you can catch it. But
I'm pretty sure it's real.
Yeah, pretty sure there's a real guy back there. He was just being really quiet, trying to sneak into another room to get away from the raptors. But it's, and so I think that's been the best use of that. And so, maybe. But I'm all for an adaptation. I'm curious whether Vaughn and Staples have changed their position on this at all, because it was conceived with the idea that we don't want it to be adapted. We're going to make something that they can't adapt. And I wonder if the media landscape has changed enough and they've seen enough to think that their work could be translated without losing something. You know what? I'm not sure I want to adapt it until they're done. You know, I don't think I want it until the book is completely finished. And I think everyone, regardless of how much you would love to see it animated, read this book first. It is, to me, crucial that you do that. I think I'm that way with everything. If a movie comes out and it's based on some famous property and I have not read it yet, the first thing I'm doing is going and getting the book so that I can read this thing, so that I feel like I've up on the source material before the movie burns its version of that reality into my brain. I want to try to absorb it and create that world for myself. And then it can be flavored by the movie, but I want to have it what I think the author's intent was in there first. So I'm trying to see if I have any other really interesting things to say. And I think we've used up our time that we normally spend for about an hour or so. It is impossible for me to recommend this book for grown-ups. This is definitely a book that you need to be an adult to read. You know, there's some books I'm like, oh, maybe you're a teenager and stuff, and maybe your teenager is ready for this. I'll let you make that determination. I'm not going to tell a teenager to read this book. But for grown-ups that can have a more of a realistic relationship with nudity and violence, I think that this is just superb. It is beyond the compare. There is nothing else like it on the shelves and in any medium. Everyone should take a crack at Saga.
Yes.
And I had one other thought, and that was when we're talking about adaptation, it was interesting to me how much my thoughts were going to how would they be able to handle the sex and the nudity, and how little consideration I did to the horrific violence that is all the way through here, because we show horrific violence all the time. And this is not an original idea of mine or anything, but the idea that we are completely desensitized to violence and but somehow are still offended by sex, which that's kind of, you know, the more you think about it, the more disturbing that is. And just because I can identify that doesn't mean I can always completely separate myself from that. But that is the case. So and what else? And we'll let Sheila throw in one more comment. She did with Bullet Train. She read it first, and now she can't wait for the movie. And I don't know what we're talking about. Do you know Bullet Train, Vivian? Is this just me?
I don't. Let's look it up.
Okay. Well, the only Bullet Train I know is the one that, you know, the governor tried to make and then Republicans make fun of now. That's the Bullet Train I know they don't like that we didn't get it done. So now I have to go dig it out. I keep going to Snowpiercer. I'm like, I know Snowpiercer. That was good. And I actually sat there and dug up the original graphic novels that they made that movie out of, because I wanted to read those before I saw the movie, which is very cool. People should go see Bullet Train. It's got Chris Evans, Tilda Swinton. It's directed by Bon. I can't remember what his full name. The guy did Parasite and The Host and a bunch of other Korean movies that I absolutely love. Top-notch movie if you haven't gone and seen it yet. So, okay. So I guess our summary is, Vivian, sum up what you think of Saga. I already did my take on it. Should people read this book?
I think if you're a fan of sci-fi, fantasy, drama, family drama, and you can stomach a level of verisimilitude in those things,
right,
at an adult level, then it is an ideal story. And also, I do not say this lightly, a must read.
Yeah, it is. If you're going to exist in this world as a grown up and read these kind of books, Saga is a must read. It really, really is. So I think that sums it up from both of us. It's just the highest marks from this thing. If you even have an inkling that you might like it, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot, see if you like it. It's probably not going to be every single person's cup of tea, but for the people it hits with, it is going to be, you're going to be in love with this book. Next month, we are reading Batgirl Year One of my favorite, like, straight up and down comic books. It's a superhero comic. I thought this would be a good one to read because we're getting a Batgirl movie starring Leslie Grace. That is, I think, going straight to HBO Max. I can't keep track of what's streaming and what's not. The line is blurring more every single day. And so we're going to read Batgirl Year One by Chuck Dixon, and Scott Beatty did the writing. and I can't remember who did the art. The art is gorgeous though, and I'm blanking on the name. It's a fantastic book. It's a really, really good story. It retells the origin of Batgirl for modern times and does it in a great way. And I know for a fact that they took it and were using it as a blueprint for a lot of what is going to come in this Batgirl movie we're getting from Warner Brothers. So I think, when we said it's always good to read the source material first, this is a chance for you to read that source material and get all caught up before the movie comes in. And then you'll be the annoying person sitting next to your friend or your spouse or something, leaning over and go, "Oh, in the book, what they did was they did this," and you'll have that internal knowledge that will inform what you see on the screen. So, all right, everybody, in a month, we're going to do Batgirl Year One. Thank you so much for bearing with us. We had a bunch of technical and logistical issues today, including them poking my brain, but it all worked out, and we got to talk about Saga. Thank you so much. We will see you guys in a month.
Woo!
Bye.